Hi, guys. Welcome to Real Food Recovery. We are excited today. We have a very fun guest to join us, and I cannot wait to give it away who it is. So, what I'm going to do is say hello to Jamie and turn it over to her, and she is going to let the cat out of the bag. So, hey, Jamie, how's it
Yes,
going?
good. I am very glad to have Melissa Maris with us today. Melissa, better known as Lissa, to her fans and to her readers, has really built an empire all around raw food and her brand Raw Food Romance. And really, Lissa's truly began her journey into raw food because she went vegan for the animals initially, and eventually found her way to becoming raw for her health, which I love. I love that journey, right? She was constantly peeling back the layers and looking at what was a right fit for her in her life, and it led her here. Lissa's been eating a raw vegan diet and living a vegan lifestyle since 2014. So it's really very inspiring and remarkable. She speaks at summits, events, and she enjoys creating delicious raw vegan recipes, and she does that beautifully. If you follow her on Instagram, if you follow her on any social media, you will see her food is as beautiful as life-giving. So we'll have all the links for all of her social media in our show notes as well. But Lissa has combined her love of photography with food to create recipe books and meal plans to inspire others to choose more raw meals. Her favorite topics are how to combat cravings and deal with the mindset shifts around, you know, healthy choices and how we make the choices that stick to us for the long term. You can find her ebooks at again at Raw Food Romance, and we will put the link to those ebooks in our show notes. And we've got a special deal today for 40% off our ebooks, which is amazing. And all of that will be in our show notes. So, Lissa, thank you again for joining us. I just wanted to kick it off and have you share with our listeners and viewers. We've got, both podcast platform and a YouTube platform. Tell us a little bit about how you found your way first into veganism and then eventually to raw.
Thank you so much. And yes, thank you, Jamie and Paige, for inviting me on. This is going to be so much fun. I'm always happy to share, to inspire. That's one of my greatest passions in life, is really to help people to find their way, um,
Yes.
just for healthier things, right? Like, you don't have to be all raw, but just like trying to figure out what works for them and moving forward. So for my story, I started, so right now, 2024, I've been raw now for a decade. Actually, my 10-year anniversary was a few days ago or last week. So
Congratulations. Wow.
thank you. And but it started a lot earlier than that. In 2004, so 20 years ago, when I say that, it's so crazy to think, but 20 years ago is when I first started hearing about a raw food diet. And I kind of really resonated with it. I was like, this makes a lot of sense, eating as close to nature as possible. But, I ate the standard stuff, and I worked in a health food store, so I knew better, but I still ate the
Don't we
stuff.
all? Don't we
Yeah,
all?
no, we all. So I did know better, but for the 10 years between 2004 and 2014, I tried all different kinds of diets. Like, I was stuck in diet culture. I was restricting my calories. I would go on kind of like binge restrict phases where I would, go on a calorie restrictive diet, or I would follow some kind of other diet or whatever, but I would be restricting my calories to the point that eventually my body was like crying out for energy and calories. So then
Sure.
I would end
Yeah.
up in a binge cycle. So I
And
would,
let's be clear. Sorry, Lisa, I don't mean to interrupt you, but let's be clear. This is very common. This is very
yes,
common for women, particularly across the board. And so many of the people that we coach and that we've worked with over the years, this is so common. And so many people come to RFR, come to work with me or with Paige, and they'll be like, it's like I'm eating on autopilot. I don't know what's going on. I can't stop myself. And it really, yes, it could be a deficit in calories, but it truly is 99% of the time a deficit in nutrients, macro or micronutrients. The body is crying for them. And at one point or another, it will do what it needs to do to get them. And so many women internalize that as shame and blame and self-judgment and condemnation. And it's it's not, is the body trying to do what it does best, which is to
Yes.
stay alive and to thrive. So
Yes.
going, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I
No,
wanted to
that's
make.
okay. I'm glad you said that because I went through all of that as well. Like
Yeah, me
it
too.
rings true because when like I would be calorie restricting, but when you calorie restrict, you also nutrient restrict. So it's like, you know, I wasn't eating a variety. I wasn't eating abundance. I was like trying to stay in this little tiny box of what this diet culture wanted me to be in. And so I would always default to raw because, again, like I said, it resonated the most with me, but I couldn't figure out why I couldn't stick to it. But in 2014, I was dealing with a lot of health issues. Like over the years, I would do the diets and then I would, you know, eat the junk and I would sometimes be healthy and then other times not. And just like, you know, most people in society do this and they want to be healthy on Monday. And then by Tuesday, Wednesday, they're not anymore or what have you. But I had gotten to the point where, and I had always had cystic acne since I was a teenager. So serious cystic acne all over my face, very, very red and inflamed and painful. I had imbalanced hormones since I started my period when I was around 13, 14. So sometimes I would go 3 to 9 months without having a period for most of my adult life until I went raw. But I also had, I was 34 at the time. I had joint pain, brain fog, digestive issues. There's a history of colon disease in my family. My mom had colon cancer. My uncle died with Crohn's disease. So there's a lot of that in my family. There's a lot of heart disease. And so I was having these issues, but I was also eating a lot of junk. I mean, I was eating a bag of Doritos, like I was telling Paige earlier, a bag of Doritos for breakfast. I was taking Chinese takeout, and then I would want to be healthy. So I'd buy the healthy food. I'd make 1 or 2 meals, and then I would default to take out pizza or whatever because I didn't feel like making anything. And then the healthy food would rot in the fridge because I just I wouldn't have the energy or the care or the desire to make it, even though I really did internally. I really wanted to, but I was having that battle. So in
Which
2014,
is super common, right? Super
oh yeah,
common for
totally.
so many people as they're making that shift.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Like it's so easy to access, like get this food and drive-throughs and delivery and all that. It's so fast. That's why they call it fast food, right? But um, yeah, so in 2024, or 2014, sorry, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. And because I had tried a raw diet countless times over the past decade and just never was able to stick to it, maybe 2 days. I think the longest I went was about 2 months, but I'd always go back to what I was always used to. But for some reason on that day, I had woken up with these like heart flutters, and I drank a lot of energy drinks. Sometimes I do 1 or 2 a day plus coffees, and I wasn't eating properly. But almost every night I'd wake up with these heart flutters, and I would think that I was having a heart attack. And then it would take me like 2 hours to get back to sleep because I'd be imagining what it would be like to die of a heart attack. So that day I was like, I need to make changes because otherwise this is actually going to happen to me. So I started watching some documentaries and I wanted to do raw again, but I couldn't figure out why I was doing it wrong or what have you. And that's when I watched a video and somebody said, if you want to go vegan overnight, watch Earthlings, Cowspiracy, and Forks Over Knives.
Pretty
So
much. Yeah, that'll do
yeah.
it.
So
Those first two especially.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I watched those and immediately I was vegan. And I never had the vegan connection before that date. I was always more of a raw foodist, so to speak. Like sometimes I would do raw food with raw animal products, and sometimes I would just do raw whole food plant-based or what have you. But I didn't really understand the concept of veganism when it came to the ethical stand against animal exploitation. So when I watched those movies, and that clicked for me, I was vegan overnight. And I was like, okay, well, now that I'm vegan, I mean, raw makes sense to me. So I might as well just go raw, right? And I feel like for me specifically, going vegan was the catalyst I needed to stay raw, but also learning over the next week or two how I needed to follow a lower fat raw diet, because before I was eating way too high fat. I was just like living on avocados, nuts, and like a little bit of greens and maybe very little fruit because I was indoctrinated to be scared of fruit by the diet culture. So I really wasn't eating a lot of fruit. I was eating more fats and things like that. And it just was not hitting and satiating me. And then I would default to cravings. So when I started following a lower fat diet, not eliminating fats, but, you know, keeping them more appropriate and eating a lot more abundance of different varieties of fruits and vegetables and greens and microgreens and sprouts and all of those other foods, and also eating abundantly and actually hitting my caloric needs, was the turning point for me. So it was not only the veganism part, but also learning to eat low fat and learning to eat enough, because I was constantly in fear of eating more calories because I was scared I was going to gain weight. When in reality, eating the more calories from an abundance of food was giving me more nutrition and fueling me and feeding me and nourishing me. And I was more satiated. I was like, this is so easy. So after that, you know, the rest is history. It's been 10 years and my gut health has improved. My cystic acne went away. I lost weight. My brain fog went away. My joint pain went away. My hormones balanced after like maybe 7 or 8 months. I've had a regular period ever since, for a decade. So it's for the first time in my life, I feel like I am myself because I'm taking care of myself and I feel free from all of the diet culture and cravings and habits that I used to have. But it did take time to reframe and to retrain myself to get to this point. But yeah, that's basically my story in a nutshell.
Awesome.
Go
Go ahead,
ahead,
Kate.
Jamie. Do you want me to?
Yeah, jump in.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned when you were talking was about cravings. And the reason that that stands out so much to me, because I think that's one of the biggest fears that people have is if I'm going to clean up my diet, or I'm in air quoting for people that can't see me, go on a diet, is, oh my gosh, I'm going to have these cravings. And they're terrifying to me because I know I'll give in and have a binge. If I have the slightest discomfort, something really bad is going to happen. So you mentioned that you don't have those anymore. Do you want to expound on that a little bit, kind of where you think those came from, what to do when you have them? And, you know, typically when we're under stress, they seem to be bigger and more of a concern. And basically, how do you deal with them? Do you have the secret sauce to whenever cravings come up and what that looks like?
Yeah, I love talking about the cravings topic because I have my own perspective on it. And this is just like how I've thought about it over the years, and it seems to make a lot of sense to me. So for me, there's cravings and there's hunger. And whenever I would be in the diet culture world, they'd always say stuff like, when you say like how to get rid of cravings or how to avoid cravings, there would always be like, I'd say 80% of the advice out there is to distract, to ignore, to push it aside, to, you know, like give yourself a couple hours and if you still want it or whatever, you know. So a lot of the craving advice is to ignore or distract or push it away,
Mhm.
which causes more cravings because you have cravings and you have hunger. So if you're hungry, you're typically going to crave stuff, regardless of what it is, because your body is sending a signal saying, hey, we need some fuel here. We need something, you know, we need some nutrition. And what I noticed for myself, I would always default, like the craving would be what I would habitually choose when I was hungry. So it would be convenient, it would be easy, it would be takeout, it would be heavy hitting dopamine foods. It would be what my family's eating, what my friends are having, what I wanted, what I saw in a commercial or whatever. Like it would be very reactive. And so whenever I'd have a hunger signal, I would be like, oh, I want Doritos, or oh, I want Chinese food, or oh, I want this thing, because I habitually always chose it. So what I realized is when I switched over to this raw vegan diet, as time went on and as I consistently chose a salad or a smoothie or a bowl of fruit or what have you, whatever it was, I noticed my cravings were changing. So whenever I'd get that hunger signal, I would crave a salad, or I would crave a smoothie, or I would crave whatever raw thing that I was excited to make. But it took time because our habits, I mean, it takes so long to
Yes.
reshift and refocus our habits in order for us to start defaulting to that. So in the beginning, of course, it's going to be challenging because you're faced with your daily habits. You're faced with the choices you make when you're hungry. So, you know, if you're hungry, you're driving to work and you typically stop off at the donut shop, it's like that common pathway that you constantly do. And you have to consciously break it and do things like planning and prep and all that, so that eventually the cue becomes, I'm chopping my apples to take in the car with me. Or when I'm at the grocery store, I buy a box of grapes instead of the candy bar or what have you. But it takes practice. And just like anything in life, I really like, there was this one quote that was like, it's not called a yoga perfect. It's called a yoga practice,
Right.
because it's a practice. You have to practice every day in order to get better at the thing. And we seem to think that we can like do a perfect diet right on day one, or your habits are going to change right on day one. But we understand that if we learn a new language, that doesn't, like, we can't fluently speak with a scientist in another language on day 1 or 2. We got to learn it one word at a time. We have to do it one habit at a time. We have to change one thing at a time and repeat it consistently. So we only get good at a new language when we practice it. We only get good at making better, healthy choices when we practice them. And that's really challenging, especially in the beginning when we are dealing with all of these past habits. And we have these reward cycles that I've noticed. And when we have a desire, we want the result. So regardless if the pizza gives us whatever reward, we always tend to think of the negatives from eating the pizza, because that's usually what we're told. We're like, oh, well, you know, if I'm craving a pizza, I'm going to think of all the bad things that the pizza is going to do. And I'm going to feel lethargic and tired and guilty and shamed and blah, blah, blah. So we like impose all of these negative thoughts before we even choose the pizza. And unfortunately, because our reward cycle is like dopamine driven and positive reaction driven, the negative ideas of what the food's going to do don't necessarily help us to make a better choice. It can for some people, but I feel like for the most part, it doesn't really help. So what I did instead that I found to be super helpful was to think of all the positive things I was going to feel about myself when I chose a salad instead. So I would be like, okay, and I do this with a lot of my clients as well. I'll say, name 5 things that you're going to feel about yourself if you choose a salad. Like, how do you feel about yourself when you do choose a salad? Because, you know, we all have, and we all feel these things. We feel proud of ourselves. We feel empowered. We feel healthy and hydrated and excited. We feel like we're on path. We feel like we did something good for ourselves. And when you think and feel these things, your reward cycle's like, I want that. I want to feel that. I want to feel proud of myself, and I want to feel empowered. So you're more likely to gravitate over towards the salad because you want the reward that that salad gives, not just feeling good or not just, you know, eating something healthy, but how you're going to feel about yourself. Because we know we already know the pizza's going to, you know, cause these other emotions. So instead of focusing on that, if we shift and focus over on the positives that we get from having a positive choice, it's so much easier to go that way because, you know, we want it. So, and I also say too, on the other side of controlling hunger, because I get a lot of people say like, how do I control my hunger? I always say we shouldn't be focused on controlling our hunger. We should be honoring our hunger, because people feel like, oh, I need to control when I'm hungry, or the cravings I get when I'm hungry. Like, I got to control all this stuff. But hunger is such a natural, normal human
Absolutely.
signal that we
Absolutely.
need to start honoring it, and notice that when we do have a craving, say you're hungry and you get a craving and you're like, oh, I want pizza, noticing it and just noticing it and saying, I'm craving pizza, which the root is that I'm hungry. So then you have your solution is like, oh, I need to eat. And then we know,
Totally
like,
right.
we have the choice that we can make. So honoring our hunger by fueling our bodies is something that can really help us. So listen.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was alarmed. I read a post last week uh, by someone who's in this recovery world with us, and they were talking about how they were getting ready to have a meal, and there was this whole internal dialogue about the meal and how much they were going to eat of it and what they were going to do and how they were going to feel. And I'm just like, just eat and listen to your body. And when your body tells you you've had like there, it seemed like setting themselves up for a little bit of failure because they were like already determining what they were going to eat without ever listening to what their body was telling them. And I thought that was such a missed opportunity. And it is. And I don't blame the person. This person's indoctrinated in the diet culture, just like the rest of us, which has, for me anyway, taken me completely away from listening to my body's cues. And absolutely in my head. And anytime I try to control something, it always backfires. And that's true across the board for me in life, which is why I truly reject control and attempts to, because I just can't I can't really be who God created me to be if I'm constantly trying to control everything and everyone around me, or feeling like I have to control what I do.
That's so true. I know I get so many people who are like, with all the rules, because the diet culture is full of
Yeah,
rules, right? And then they're like,
totally.
oh, well, Lissa, do you eat after 6 o'clock, or do you do this, or when do you eat, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I eat when I'm hungry. Like, I eat, like, if I'm hungry and it's 8:30 at night, I'm going to eat because my body is like asking for
I hear
fuel.
you.
So I'm going to
Right.
have, but when I do choose, I choose foods that, again, I mean, it's my reality now. So like when I'm hungry, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go grab an apple or have some bananas or make a salad or whatever it is, because that's what I truly want. And that's another thing that I feel like has really shifted for me is I choose raw because I want raw. And a lot of people say like, oh, well, you can't have this and you can't have that and you can't eat this. But it's like, well, I can eat anything I want, but I choose raw because that's what I feel my best eating. And that's what I actually genuinely want. Like, when I think of a salad, I'm like, oh, like salivating, thinking of lunch right now. But like, it's just, it's what I want for myself. And I don't feel it's, restrictive or what have you, or, I have to fit myself inside this box of a timed window of eating or what have you. It's like, if I'm hungry, I'm going to eat because I'm honoring my hunger. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Don't you think,
Mhm.
though, people that are just getting started out, that they really, I love the idea of honoring your hunger. I agree with that. There's no argument there. But for me specifically, before I got off of processed foods, and those people that are starting out, do they even really know what honoring their hunger would be? Do they even know what the difference is between hunger and maybe anxiety, or I'm stressed, or things like that? Do you want to help people understand a little more about what hunger actually even looks like? How do you know if it's actually hunger, or you're just a little anxious over about something?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because hunger, I feel, is like, again, we get it confused with cravings
Yes.
instead of actually needing fuel.
Mhm.
And most people don't plan their days. And that's something I'd like to talk about later too, is like
Yeah.
planning and scheduling and actually like making the plan that you want for yourself to become a reality. Because a lot of us will say, like, we'll use sleep, for example, and be like, oh, I really want to start going to bed early because I need better quality sleep. And it's a want. It's actually something we want to be doing. And I love the book called Mindful Self-Discipline, because it teaches us that self-discipline isn't forcing us to do things that we don't want to be doing. It's actually helping us to do the things that we actually really want to be doing, because we actually do want to eat healthy and we do want to go to bed early, but we also, might want other foods and we might want to stay up late. and to not put a label on good or bad, but more focusing on what you want for your life. Like, do you want this? If you want to go to bed early, then practice going to bed early. If it's not important to you, then don't do it, right? If eating healthfully is something that you want to, and if you want to work on your habits when it comes to your food, then work on that, right? And try to schedule it in and stuff. But when it comes to the hunger, I think, yes, a lot of people get it mixed up with, like you said, anxiety or dealing with
definitely at the beginning.
emotions. Yeah, dealing with emotions, coping skills, because a lot of us were raised using food as a way to deal with stuff,
Comfort.
right? You scrape your knee, you're taken out for ice cream. Your pet runs away, you go, you're fed food, or it's your birthday, so you get all the junk food. You go on vacation, you get all the junk food, and it becomes a celebration. And so we connect these foods with these things. And then when we are stressed out, when we're anxious, when we're tired, or whatever it is, we default to these old habits that we've grown up with. And I mean, myself included, like I had a lot of issues when it came to trying to figure out what was a craving and what was hunger. And what I noticed that really helped for me is every time that I felt like I had a craving for anything, it didn't matter what it was for, I would be like, okay, well, just go fuel yourself up and then see. Instead of distracting myself and ignoring the craving and pushing it off further, I would just go and make a smoothie or go make a salad or whatever. And I would notice I'd feel all those things, from the reward cycle. I would be like, oh, I'm so glad I made that choice. And I feel much better. My head is clearer and all this stuff. And with time, I learned the difference between what I was craving and when I was actually hungry. So, yeah.
Right.
Do you care if I ask one more follow-up question,
No.
Jamie? One of the things that you had said earlier when you were talking about habits was a little bit about planning and preparing. And don't you feel like in order to change those habits, do you feel like having these foods prepped and planned and on hand makes all the difference between success and failure? Or do you think that's too rigid and you should just more fly by the seat of your pants?
Yeah, I like that question too. I wanted to also touch on, again, the intuitive eating thing that you had mentioned earlier about how some people don't really realize like what intuitive eating is, because I feel like a lot of
It's a
people,
loaded phrase. It's a loaded phrase.
it is a
this
loaded phrase,
world.
eating, because you can intuitively crave, like you want raspberries, for example, like you're like, oh my gosh, all I want to, I just want to have raspberries, because maybe there's something in the raspberries that is drawing you towards the raspberries. As opposed to intuitively eating, I feel a lot of people fall into a trap where they are listening here instead of here.
Yes.
And they think, oh, well, I'm not hungry, so I'm intuitively not going to eat, which can cause issues down the road. Or, oh, I
Or
feel
vice versa.
what?
Vice versa.
Yeah, vice versa as well,
I am
right?
craving, so I'm going to eat.
Exactly. So it's kind of like, it's a fine line between learning what your body actually needs, using, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, so I'm a really big fan of the Vulcans and their logic, right? So when I look at it, I'm like, okay, we need to figure out, what does the body need? What does the body thrive on, right? And we use that logic. So when we are learning about a new lifestyle that we're trying to eat, or the healthy foods that we're trying to eat, we take the emotion out of it and we just start thinking, okay, this is ideal for my body. And I'm going to focus on eating more often, even though I might not feel that. Because I've noticed with a lot of people that I work with, they might not be hungry in the morning because they skip breakfast, but it's not because their body doesn't want it, right? It's because they've gone years and years without breakfast. So they're like, well, I don't ever want breakfast. But then when they start eating breakfast, when they start consciously planning and consciously preparing the food, suddenly they notice, they're like, I'm actually hungry in the morning now, because our body adapts to what we do to it more often than the other way around. So I wanted to share that too. But yes, the prep and planning, I feel like the most impactful prep and planning that I have done in my life was planning the night before. So the night before, all I do, and it takes like 30 seconds, is I think and write down what I want to have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And notice I said what I want to have. And I don't say what I need to have or what I have to have. It's what I want to have, because I know these foods are going to be nourishing. I know I'm going to enjoy the flavor. I know I'm going to be satiated. So I'll plan it out and I'll write it down, because studies show that when you write it down, you're more likely to do the thing. So I'll write down what I want to have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and snacks. Like, and I'll think about what's in the fridge or what I want to have or a new recipe I might want to try. And then the key to all of this is, like, you can write it down, but unless you schedule it into your day, it's likely not going to happen for most people. So what I would do is I would be like, okay, well, I need to go to bed early so I can wake up earlier, right? And I'll make my lunch in the morning, or I'll blend a double batch of dressing so I have an extra dressing for the next day. When Nate was working at a farm, he and he would get up, he would have to leave the house at 8 o'clock. So by 7:30, I wanted to have all of our meals ready so that him and I both had lunch and we both had dinner ready in the fridge. So I would get up at about 6:15 ish, and I would spend an hour or so creating all 6 meals. So I would blend 2 smoothies, I would blend 2 lunch dressings, I would blend 2 dinner dressings, and that would usually take about a half an hour. Then I would chop all the vegetables that we needed for the day and I would put them in containers. Then when it came to lunch, like, Nate would take his lunch with him and I would be working at home. I would just go in the fridge and dump my salad and my dressing and I'd be done. I'd be like, this is amazing. And then when he would come home from work, we would have dinner ready, because all it would be dump the salads and make the dressings. Unless we were making some other like fancier, dish or what have you, it would be a little different. But for the most part, that's kind of how we were eating back then. And the 1 hour prep in the morning to have 0 prep for the rest of the day was a major game changer for us too.
I agree.
No brainer. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's why one of the things that you mentioned that I wanted to go back to, I think is important about listening to your body's cues. I think, and I was guilty of this for a long time, and I see others doing it too. And I totally have compassion for it, because I know I lived it, and I still would, and probably still do if I don't stop and pause. But it's assuming that we have certain presets that, well, so for instance, the older I get, I notice that I do better with my meals earlier in the day. It doesn't mean that I have a hard and fast rule. If I'm really hungry, after, 4 or 5 o'clock, I will eat. But that is usually because I've upped my activity, whether it's organic activity or it was planned, I'm going to move my body in a specific way today activity. And then sure enough, I would get genuinely hungry after 5, when other days, if I don't have an increase in activity, I don't. Okay. So I think some folks that we work with, and I know I used to be this way, is they start to condemn, or they start to self-judge when they're like, oh, I had this firm and this routine that I stayed with, that I would not eat after 5 or 6, and now I'm hungry, and there must be something wrong with me. And what did I do? And if you go back and ask them what they actually did that day, or even the day prior, oh, well, I went on a hike with some friends, or I went on the bike ride with my partner. And well, yeah, that's why you're hungrier. Like, there's nothing to condemn here. Your body is telling you what it needs. Don't deny it. But that's why I think this rigid thinking about, what we can have or can't have, or the timing, or, when our bodies are working with us in ways that we expect, it's a nice thing. And sometimes it's also a really good learning opportunity when our bodies are like, hey, you don't remember we did this, but I do, and I need some extra fuel. And I'm just going to keep sending you hunger cues until you give it to me one way or another.
Yep. And then we all, we default to what's habitual, or
right.
what's easy, what's convenient, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, no, I like that you said pause, because some people ask me, when do the cravings go away? And I'm like, well, the cravings don't actually ever truly necessarily go away. They change.
Mhm.
And when you're stressed out, sometimes those really deep ones that are really ingrained, even though you might be doing really well, sometimes during times of extreme stress, you
Totally.
lose a parent or a loved one, or you lost your
Totally.
job. Those can like come to the surface. And it's not like they're gone forever. Like some people think like, oh, well, you go raw and whatever, you're perfect and everything. And it's like, we're human beings. No, like we are still dealing with all kinds of stuff. But it's also about, I love that you said pause, because we do need more pause in general, not just with what we eat, but life in general. We
Oh
need to
yeah.
take a moment and just take a step back and be like, look for the root. Look for
Mhm.
the root of why are you craving pizza? Because it's not the pizza really that you're craving. It's something else. It's nourishment. It might be comfort. It might
Comfort.
be like what
Connection is typically what
connection?
people will talk about with those
Yes.
kinds of foods that are eaten in a community setting or with family or at a certain date and time, or they feel the reward, like Friday pizza night, people would eat it
Yeah.
because they had a reward for the end of the week. That was the cue.
Yes.
Yeah, and cues and triggers are, like you said, they're deep, they're or they're habitual. And I love that you bring in, we interviewed Dr. Judd Brewer on our podcast, and I love his work all around habit,
Mhm.
all around rewiring habits and beginning to understand habits and beginning to put new ones into place. And I mean, it really is transformational, the work that he does with people in this space around, the hunger habits and even the anxiety loops,
Yeah.
which can lead to hunger habits. So
Ah,
yeah, I love
no,
that
it's
you
it's so deep. It's so deep. And people think just like, oh, I'm just going to change my diet and everything's going to be okay. It's like, well, you gotta work at it. You
yes,
work at it.
yes. Tell me, Paige, can I ask another quick question or do we
Sure.
throw it?
Sure. Go ahead.
So tell me about your journey with fat. And I mean, the fat that you eat, how you found that balance for you. I know that many women, myself included, Paige and I have talked about this before, and other members that we work with have a fear, right, of fat.
Mhm.
Um, and that's something that I've been actively working to get over. And I'm so grateful because it's been a game changer. But how have you found your way with fat phobia or through fat phobia?
And like body shaming and stuff and being okay with our
No,
body.
I mean literally
Fat
intaking fat,
intake.
dietary fat. Yes.
Thank you. Yes. So when I look at it, because I would always follow like a very high fat raw diet,
Right.
which would, like, knowing what I know now and insulin sensitivity and all
Mhm.
that kind of stuff, I realized I was just eating way too much. And it's not that I need to get rid of fat, because there's a lot of people in the raw community who are very fat, like you said, fat phobic. Like they're scared to put any amount of seeds or anything on their food.
Oh,
And that's so dangerous. Like we need fats in our diet. But what helped me the most was to say, I eat an appropriate amount of fat. So I use the word appropriate because it's not too much and it's not too, it's like three bears.
And it might be different
And
one
it might
day
be different.
to the next.
Exactly. Because some people, like if you are pregnant or you're older or you're more active or you're younger, you may need a little bit more fat than someone who is not. For example, if you're a woman, you might need a little bit more than a man, or like so many factors come into play. So I always share with people to try different amounts and just test it out, and don't freak out or like get obsessive over the percentages, because some people are like, no, I have to stay at exactly 10% fats, and it becomes this rigid line that they need to stay with. Whereas it's like, well, try different ones, like try 10% for a little while, and then maybe try 15% for a little while and see how you feel, because maybe you need 15%.
Mhm.
Maybe you need 20%. And don't let the numbers like dictate how
Right.
much you have, because some days, like you said, some days you might want more, and other days you might not really care for it. You might fall into a lower fat day, and our bodies fluctuate. And as
They
women,
do throughout our cycles, they
fluctuate.
fluctuate.
we
One
fluctuate.
week out of the month, we might need more fat, crave more fat. The next week, we might crave more of another macronutrient or even micro, that we need to be in tune with that, and kind of, and 1 month may not look like the month before.
Exactly. I know. It's so interesting. And that's why I use the word appropriate, because it's appropriate for me at this time in my life.
That day,
And,
right?
at this day, it's appropriate today for me to have whatever, right? Keeping in line with, staying on the lower fat end, but not getting all worked up about the exact percentages and fitting into a box again, right? It's like, it's about being appropriate and enjoying an abundance of other things too, right? Because when I was eating higher fat, like most of my diet was mostly fat,
Sure.
I had a very limited diet and I wasn't eating a lot of the abundance from the other things. But then when I started to eat lower fat, again, not eliminating it, but just lowering it down a little bit, I had bigger salads and I had more variety in my salads, and I was eating more fruit, and I was having sprouts and microgreens and all this stuff, while not being scared of having fat in my foods, just keeping them at an appropriate level. So I get the satiation and the nourishment, but I also get, that deliciousness, because, we're attracted to that density, and without having to go overboard with it. So, a lot of people can fall into that trap too if they're not eating enough throughout the day. And this is something that I learned early on. If I didn't eat enough during the day, I would default to super high fat things at night, salty, fatty, those pleasure center foods, because I just wasn't eating enough throughout the day. But then when I started, eating breakfast and making sure that I had my snacks and eating my lunch, not skipping meals, not picking at my food, when I started to actually fuel myself, I noticed that a lower fat diet was super easy because I was eating so abundantly and I was eating so many calories from a variety of different foods. And I also found my specific like calorie amount. In the beginning, I did track my calories, and I do every once in a while. I'll check in with myself and be like, how much did I eat today, or whatever. But I used it as a learning tool, and I learned about the foods that I was putting into my body, and I learned like what a big salad looked like, and what the volume of food on a raw diet is a lot different than the volume of food on a cooked food diet because of calorie density. So when people go raw or want to add more raw, most people are eating these like little tiny salads and they're like, I'm so hungry, right? And why am I hungry all the time? And I'm like, because you need to eat like 6 times that. Like you have to make massive salads. And I love to eat. I mean, let's be honest, I love eating. I think it's amazing. It's such a connection with the food, and I know I'm fueling myself, and I really love the flavors. So I like to eat big salads. So that's another reason why I love raw, is because I can eat these huge, massive salads and just really enjoy my food. But I had to learn what that looked like first. And then I could release, the counting or whatever, just because I was using, again, logic, right? I was like, what does this look like? What do I actually need for my body? And what does it look like? And over time, I got used to it. And I was like, okay, I know how much I need to chop in order to get this satiating salad. And I know what kind of dressing to make or what have you. And then, like I just naturally didn't need to count anymore because it was just a reality. I knew what I needed.
I love that. At Real Food Recovery, we don't have a specific, I'm doing air quotes again, diet that we tell people. We just say we recommend non-processed food, single ingredient, whole foods is what we tell. Otherwise, we don't tell people what to eat. And those that are listening may be more interested in a raw lifestyle, although most people, I think, would think, I can't do that 100%. There's no way I could do that. So what would you say to someone who's listening who might be interested in leaning into the raw lifestyle a little bit, but maybe they don't have a goal of 100%? Where would they start? What could they do to incorporate a little bit in that? And there's a lot of misconceptions about a raw food diet too, that, oh, that's too hard or too restrictive. Do you want to talk about all those things?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so starting out, I love that you worded it lean into a raw diet. I love that. It's amazing because when I share my posts and when I'm talking about raw food, I am not trying to have people do 100% raw. unless they want to, unless that's something that really interests them and they want to start working towards it. I don't like, there's some social media influencers out there who are like, you have to eat only raw. That's the only way to go, blah, 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 blah. But I want people to embrace more raw, right? So
I
yeah,
agree.
like if you're still doing sweet potatoes and beans and rice and whatever you're doing, add more raw. Because, you know, we all know we should be eating more raw foods. Like, let's be honest, right? It's so much better to have those fresh, hydrating things in our diet. And a lot of us
Mhm.
get stuck in a rut where we're making the same cooked foods over and over again. And we
Yes.
forget to start adding more raw. Like, have a little salad with your sweet potato. Actually, I have a friend who does raw. He does like high raw, what, you know, air quotes, high raw. But he'll make a big salad and then he'll put a baked sweet potato inside. So he gets kind of the best of both worlds. And I like to guide people towards more raw than going all raw. So I love that you said lean into, because it's about trying things out. Like, maybe it's Thursday night for you. For example, you can look through some different recipes online and be like, I want to try making this raw meal for dinner. And you start there, or you start with maybe smoothies for breakfast or a raw salad for lunch. Maybe you try some new recipes. Like Nate and I made some raw sushi. We made 4 different types of raw sushi for my 10-year
Ooh.
raw anniversary, and they were so good. Oh my gosh. But like trying new recipes and playing around with different types of food. So it's not just salads and smoothies. It's not boring or what have you, which is one of the misconceptions that people tend to have over raw, is like, oh, it's so boring. And it's like, well, no, you can get creative with your food. Just like you can get creative in the kitchen with cooked food, you can get creative in the kitchen with raw, right? So you can play around and have like different kinds of things. And for me, it's all about having fun and exploring and not having, again, the rigid rules over how raw you are. And it's not a competition. It's not a competition between who can be as 100% pure and perfect than the next, right? It's about your own personal connection with whole raw foods and adding more of them to your life. So I just recommend people just try out some new recipes and go slow. Again, it's like learning a new language. It's like
Mhm.
learning a new instrument.
Well said.
We understand that it takes time to learn a new language. We understand that it takes time to learn a new instrument. It's going to take time to learn to incorporate different things into your life. And then again, practice, consistency, all of that is going to help you to reinforce those new habits, because the more we practice something, the better we get at it. And that's just like
Yeah.
anything in life, right? So the more we practice making better choices, the easier they become. But as for the limiting beliefs or misconceptions about raw diet, people think it's restrictive and, like I said, limiting. It doesn't have to be. Now, again, if you feel like it might be, I would just recommend adding more raw and keeping those things that you love in your diet, and just, you know, working around those foods instead of eliminating everything overnight completely. And I did that because that's what I wanted to do. And that's what I felt called and resonated towards doing. But not everyone can do that. Actually, most
True.
people can't do that. And I don't recommend people doing that, because most people are coming from gut disorders. And if they jump right into a raw diet and their gut microbiome is, I'm huge on the gut
Very deep.
microbiome. I talk about it so much. I think it irritates people, but I'm like so passionate about the gut microbiome and how we can't necessarily jump right into a raw diet if you're coming from a low fiber, low variety
Right.
diet. You have to go slow and you have to honor where your body is at. And I always say, work with your microbiome instead of against it, because most people are trying too hard to jump right into a 100%, you know, perfect diet overnight, when their gut is like, whoa, 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 whoa,
Yeah.
back. Yeah,
Yeah.
I only want 2 florets of broccoli, not 3 cups. Thank you very
Right.
much.
Right.
Right. So taking your time and slowly incorporating, like, for example, say most nights you make spaghetti with a marinara, and that's like your go-to meal. When you make your marinara, add a couple pieces of broccoli to it, or add some bell peppers, fresh and raw. Like, don't cook them, just add a little bit here and there, and slowly over time incorporate a little bit more raw into your diet while you train your gut to grow stronger, to deal with more fibers. So limiting and restrictive. It definitely isn't. Nate and I eat more variety of food than we've ever eaten in our entire life. Like we did when we read that book Fiber Fueled by Dr. Will Bolsewicz about, the plant points and different varieties of foods. We did a list just for fun. We're like, how many different things do we buy in a week? So we wrote a list of all the different foods that we eat in a week, and it was like over 80. So we're like,
Wow.
I eat so much more variety now because back in the day, it was wheat, tomato, potato, animal, just formed in
Yeah.
different ways or what have you. So I eat way more variety now, and I have fun in the kitchen. I love to create new recipes. That's obviously what I do for a living, is creating fun recipes. So I love to get creative. And it's definitely not boring at all for me. I enjoy it. There's always something new to eat. And when people are like, what's your favorite food or meal to make? I'm like, I don't even know. I've got hundreds. Like I could pick all kinds of different things, and I'm really excited about my food. Some people feel like raw diet is pretentious, like as if a lot of people are, better than you because they eat raw or what have you.
Interesting.
So that's a misconception. I think it's not necessarily about raw food in general, because broccoli is pretty innocent in the whole matter.
Right.
Yeah, it's not the broccoli and the lettuce that, is pretentious. It's the person who's following the diet who has this, persona or dare I say ego around their diet. And it doesn't have to be just raw. It can be any diet out there where people are like, no, 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 this is the way or whatever. So it can be, but it's not the fruits and vegetables that are that way. Another misconception is, this one is and isn't a misconception, but not accessible to everybody. So this it's a truth and it's not at the same time. So yes, there are food deserts, and yes, there are places where you can't get certain things, and yes, it's very expensive in some places, and not everybody can do an all raw diet. But that said, it's not about being 100% pure and perfect all the time anyways. It's
Right.
about doing the best that you can with what's available to you. So if certain things are accessible to you, then you can choose those things, right? Instead of, some people will say, well, I can't get young coconut, so I'm not even going to try, right? I'm not even going to make this thing, because they just brush it all off as like, it's too impossible for me, and it's not accessible and I can't do it. When in reality, maybe they could have chosen a different recipe, or they could have used avocado in place of coconut, or what have you, right? And then there's seasonal stuff. Some seasons, there's no certain, pomegranates, for example, you can't make pomegranate stuff all year long.
Sure.
So yeah, for accessibility, there is a truth to it, but there's also, like you can do a lot more than what you might think you can do.
Yeah.
Like,
I think people in general, and this is true, I think no matter how you eat, people in general can get focused on what they can't do versus what they can, right? Instead of thinking about what they can do. Yes, I know for me, I was whole food plant-based for a long time, and had, when I added more raw food in, it really just re-energized so much of how I felt and how my body spoke to me. And it was, I had to do it over time. But I really just felt like I was getting the nutrients my body was craving. When I added more raw in, and I realized that my body was asking me for some different nutrients that it just wasn't getting, and it wasn't able to absorb from the cooked foods that I was eating, even though it was a whole food plant-based and calorie, following the rules of calorie density. It just, when I added more raw, I felt a different kind of energy in my body. So I appreciate what you're saying. Lissa, you've been a joy to have. Thank you for your time. I really just, again, want to thank you for the work that you do. Lissa has made raw food, whether you're 20% dabbler or an 80% heading towards 100 all inner, Lissa has made the raw food movement very accessible to anyone on that spectrum.
Very
And
fun.
beautiful, beautiful stuff, and you've taken such time and care, put a lot of love into your recipes, into your books. She has not just created a few recipe books, guys. She's created a movement, really, in the raw food world. And her books are as beautiful as her personality and beautiful as her story. because there's a lot of heart in there. And
Mhm.
she puts a lot of thought into, and very creative into these recipes, but really these whole ideas, right? Like Lissa's created raw food wraps that are, that would blow any, store-bought wrap out of the water. She's
Right.
created raw food hamburgers or, burger recipes that are raw, that are beautiful and life-giving and easy, right? She's made these things. Those are two of her biggest, my biggest favorites of Lissa's that I've played with. And it's really cool because she's got something for someone who's, whether they're just learning or they're more seasoned.
Right.
Mm.
Pun, was that a pun?
I know, I was thinking that.
Thank you so much for those kind words. That means so much to me. And I
Done a
really
great
do
job.
want to make this accessible to everybody, because I'm not here to make the raw foodies more raw foodies, like obese. I'm here to talk to the average person who was like
Right.
me back in the day, and I was having a hard time and I wanted it to be easier. And yeah, the wraps have been game changers. I absolutely, like, the highlight of my day is when people send me a message and they're like, I'm eating more fresh raw fruits and vegetables because of you. And regardless of what their diet looks
Yes.
like, that
Right.
makes my day, because I know that they're doing something little to themselves and they're enjoying it. And I've had like so many people who are like, oh, my spouse like said, wow, this was good. And they're like, that's a big win in this house, or their kids are
Mhm.
asking for it. And it just makes my heart so happy that people want to embrace more, healthier options more often. That's really the goal.
Oh, I
Well,
love, well said. Nice summary.
Thank you.
agreed.
Thank you again for joining us. And if you want to find out more about us, you can find us at realfoodrecovery4u.com. That's the number 4 and the letter U. And we hope to see you there. Thanks, guys. Until next time. Bye-bye.